everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Shani. I'm the Ismar Davy Visiting Assistant Curator in the Carey Collection. And I started my job a little over a year ago. I first came into the Carey in 2017 for a 1-month fellowship where I continued my research of Ismar David, who is an German Israeli American designer, type designer, graphic designer, illustrator, architecture, educator, a wonderful designer and artist whose archives are kept in the Carey, and I had a wonderful time continuing my research there. Cut to a little over a year ago, where I actually got to be part of the Carey. This is the Wallace Library, where the RIT Carey Graphic Arts Collection is located. And the Carey is one of the world's premier libraries on graphic communication history and practices. And our growing library holds over 45,000 volumes and over 130 archival collections. We also have a technology collection that focuses on preserving the heritage of letterpress printing. And in our press room, we maintain working printing presses and all of the additional equipment that is needed for printing. And our historic collection is very much alive. It is being preserved through its active use in a very wide range of educational activities like classes and workshops, special events and visits, from scholars and artists in residence, and even online workshop recently. And our typeface collection includes thousands of metal and wood fonts, the majority of which are American made, and up until 2014, all of which were exclusively of Latin characters. In an effort to expand the collection coverage of global scripts, the Carey acquired an important collection of some 40 fonts of Hebrew wood type. And before we dive into the collection itself, I first want to share with you the reasons why I'm so fascinated with letters and the stories that they tell. So when we go back and think about Gutenberg printing press and how it took the world by storm and led to the printing revolution, where the press facilitated the wide circulation of information and ideas and introduced change and progress to the societies that it reached, we need to remember that in order to print, you needed typefaces. And so we can see how over time the shape of the type changed and designers created various styles of letters in a way that I very much like to look at it just like art or architecture in the slide that we can see. We can always get a sense of a time and a place when we look at a particular typeface. And that is because typefaces are never made in a void. They always reflect a need of a particular time. So when learning about typefaces, we're actually learning about the environment in which they were made in and what they were made for. And that really covers a wide range of topics, the time and the geography, technology, culture, politics, economics, religion, and so on. So it's pretty endless. And with that in mind, I'd like to start by first very briefly talking about Hebrew printing and very briefly describe the development of the Hebrew script and type. So the modern Hebrew letter developed from the Aramaic or Assyrian alphabet around 560 BCE. And Hebrew was the language of the Israelites and the Judean people for over 1,300 years, when in about 200 BCE, it died as a spoken language, and it was restricted to religious practice. It was only reintroduced as a spoken language around the 1880s. So we have this very long period of time where Hebrew was only read and copied, or mostly read and copied. And scribes who were authorized to write Hebrew letters couldn't change the letters because they were considered holy. and they could not alter the shapes even at the cost of poor readability. So the shape of the letter form was fixed, and it didn't undergo a natural evolution that a secular script would, for example, comparing it to the Latin script. And moving forward, the invention of printing was welcomed with enthusiasm by Jewish communities that were scattered in Europe and amongst other nations at the time. And as religious Hebrew manuscripts played a central role in their lives, printing them instead of copying them by hand increased the production and the distribution of these texts and contributed to Hebrew readership. But the shift from written form to movable metal type was quite problematic. The punch cutters who created the Hebrew letters had no clear model of how Hebrew letters look like. Most of them did not know the script and the language, and so they just copied shapes from existing manuscripts, usually of poor readability. And while there was a period of some typographic development in the 15th century in Europe, it was relatively brief. The Jewish people suffered persecution, and they often were forced to flee and relocate their presses. And that prevented the continuous natural development that is needed for the refinement and improvement of typefaces. And I want to show you an example of that. So in the Hebrew script, we have couples and groups of letters that are very similar to one another. And where they're not properly written or properly designed, they're very hard to distinguish between. So we're looking at a detail from a book that was printed in Italy in 1475. And when we look closely, we can see how similar these letters are, right? These are not the same letters. We have a Reish and a Daled on the left, and a Chaf and a Bet on the right. So they look so similar to one another. It's very hard to differentiate between them. So when you're looking at this manuscript, unless you kind of know the language or you can decipher the words from the context, it's quite hard to read it. And this phenomena carries on, as we can see in this example from 1741. It's in this particular print, it's actually very hard to guess the Hebrew word that's printed there. So far, I was able to come up with 6 options. And as you can see by their translation, they have very different meanings. And since I know that this illustration is actually describing a Jewish butcher in the Prague ghetto, I can maybe narrow it down to 2 options. So maybe it's kosher or meat, kasher, basar. But still, this is something that that hinders readability. And another example of the slow and challenging development of Hebrew type can be seen in the shortage of styles of Hebrew typefaces. So until the early 20th century, there was one predominant style of type, one. And it was manufactured in various foundries, mostly in Europe, and it had several design variations. It was usually named after the generic term meruba, which means square in Hebrew, and it refers to the square shape of the Hebrew formal writing style. When we start talking about Hebrew printing in the US, we can see that the first book that was printed with Hebrew text was a Hebrew grammar book. It was published in 1735 by Judah Muniz, and it was published specifically for the use of students at Harvard College at Cambridge, for whom Hebrew was a required subject. So the Hebrew was printed, again, in this meruba style, and it was printed for scholarly purposes and not for the use of a local Jewish community. Before 1820, the Jewish American community was very small, and they got their books from Europe. But with the arrival of more immigrants from Europe in the 1820s, a new market developed. For example, we can see here Isaac Lesser's English translation of Sephardic prayers from 1837. And again, it is set in a variation of the Merubah style typeface. The mass immigration between 1881 and 1924 included an emergence of a dynamic culture of Hebrew and Yiddish printing. One very central example of that is the Jewish Daily Forward newspaper that was published in New York City in Yiddish. So the Vorwärts, as it was called in the Yiddish language, was founded in 1897 by the Jewish Socialist Press Federation. It was intended as a civic aid and a cohesive device for Jewish immigrants from Europe. And it quickly became the leading Yiddish newspaper in the US. We can see here now the front page of the first issue from April 22nd in 1897. And I think that you can also guess and probably see that, again, it is all set in the Merubah style typeface. The Forward gained great popularity, paralleling the rapid growth of the Yiddish-speaking population. It was a time when the Jews living in Eastern Europe under the Russian Tsar were brutally attacked by their non-Jewish neighbors and imperial officials. They suffered oppressive laws that barred them from almost all means of providing for themselves and were physically segregated. A vast number of these Yiddish-speaking Jews managed to leave a century-old legacy behind and flee to the US. And the Forward became the voice of the Jewish immigrant communities and the symbol of American socialism. It assumed the role of an Americanizing agent, introducing its readers on social, economic, political, and cultural aspects of life in the US. And at the height of its influence during World War I, it had a daily circulation of more than 200,000 issues. Now, remember how we talked about typefaces giving us this sense of a time and the place and how they reflect a need. So here is some footage from New York City around 1939, and we can see Yiddish signs of Jewish American businesses. Again, they're all based on the Merubah style. Some of them are hand painted, but I feel that this style has come to represent the European Jewish refugees and how they integrated into American culture and society. And perhaps a testament to the assimilation process that the Jewish communities underwent, could be seen in the many Yiddish words that made their way into American English spoken today. So, I mean, I'm giving you now my spiel, and I really hope there won't be any glitches. Okay, let's go back to the collection now that we have all of that background. So this collection was acquired from the artist and collector Richard Rockford. He is a found material artist who owns and operates his antique shop in Clarence, New York. He creates his art using only used materials and objects like old furniture, old paper, and also materials related to the printing industry. And Rockford has first bought drawers of Hebrew type in the early 70s from Walter Beek, who said he bought them from the Jewish Daily Forward newspaper. Rockford continued adding to the collection over the next 30 years, buying more from Nathan Silver and others. And we are now researching the provenance of our collection in hope to find more evidence to support this Jewish Daily Forward connection. Acquiring this collection was the beginning of a very long process of converting the letters into archival objects that are accessible for printing, teaching, and research. The first step was to carefully clean and restore the wood types. This was made possible through the Adopt a Font volunteer program initiated by our associate curator, Emilia Fontanelle. Most of the volunteers were not familiar with the Hebrew script, and yet they did a great job of cleaning, measuring, and sorting the type into boxes according to their size. In order not to damage the wood types, they need to be cleaned with mineral spirits or with a friendlier replacement like vegetable oil. In the Carey collection, we use Crisco, which also happens to be kosher. It has no animal fat, and it is a solution for kosher rules of separating dairy and meat. And it was a significant component of Jewish cooking, as you can see here in the cover of Crisco Recipes for the Jewish Housewife from 1933. This is something that most of the women got sent to their home as a commercial recipe book. And again, as you can see, the cover of it is set in a merubah style letters. And I often wonder if we're cleaning our letters with Crisco, which is kosher, does that make our letters kosher? I don't know. I'm not the one to answer that. So once the type was cleaned, it was time to look closely at the design of the letter and identify each of the merubah variations. So we can then typeset each different font for proof printing. And we started doing this just as COVID-19 hit. So as you can see here, I'm setting the type in galleys at home. And I'm spacing them with corrugated cardboard, which is not printing material. Once I completed the sets, I sent them over to Amelia to print in the Carey press room when it was possible, or in her home press with the help of Finn, the loyal shop dog who helped greatly in this process. And recently we were able to come back to the Carey press room to continue the work. With a grant we received from the Rochester Area Community Foundation Historic Preservation, Restoration, and Literature Fund, we were able to add a student employee, Kat Ward, to our team. And you can see her typesetting and proofing a set of letters here. So now that we have printed the entire collection, we are very close to finishing the process of cataloging it. Soon, each proof will be uploaded to our digital collection, and it will be fully accessible for any student, researcher, or printer that is interested to engage with it and further the knowledge around it. This will also be online with all the data that we were able to collect so far, and a guide to the collection that will explain the cataloging schema and how to use the collection. What was very exciting and interesting for me was exploring and analyzing this Hebrew type and typography through physical typesetting and printing. The slowness and the tactility of letterpress process really provided me with a deep perspective. It changed the way I think and use type and understand its history and its development. And I want to share with you some of the things that I've discovered so far during this process. And I think that these discoveries shine a light on what printing Hebrew letters meant, and also how the practice possibly affected and maybe damaged the design of letter forms in the future. So let's go back again to the issues of those groups of Hebrew letters that are very, very similar to one another. And while this makes it harder to recognize and read them, it did allow the printers to come up with solutions for missing sorts. They could fairly easily alter existing letters. For example, the letter Nun and the letter Gimel that we see here. So let's flip the image so we can see the letter forms in the correct way. And this is the Nun, this is the Gimel, and this is a Nun that is made out of a Gimel. So in this style and in this design, the only thing that differentiates between the two letters is this small space between the vertical and the horizontal stroke. And this is just one example. This was also done to turn the chet into a hey, the daled into a reish, and so on. And what that meant was that the original design of those letters was altered. The letters were deformed. And that meant that printing with them, the consistency of the typeface was damaged. And that meant that it was harder to read. Another interesting typesetting solution has to do with the system of diacritical marks used to represent vowels in Hebrew called nikud. So the dot in the middle of the letter pei that we see here is called the gesh, and it marks the pronunciation of the letter as a P as opposed to the pronunciation as an F without it. But when we look closely, we can see that the two dots are very different from one another. The one on the right is engraved as part of the design of the letter, but the one on the left is not. It's actually a nail that was hammered into the type. And this appears to be the solution for all the letters that have this diacritic mark. Here's another example of the letter bet. It has the sound of the letter B with a dot and the letter V without it. Here we can see how different the sizes and the shapes and the positions of the nails are, and how, again, this damages the original design and eventually, when printed, hinders the process of reading. Out of the 27 Hebrew letters that are squarish in shape and generally look similar to one another, there are 6 letters that have descenders. These are strokes that extend below the baseline, and they help with letter differentiation. However, 4 of them are final letters. Final letters are alternative characters that are used only when they appear at the end of a word. So that leaves us with only 2 letters that appear in high frequency and have a descender. This is the Ain and the Kuf. We notice that some of the letters that have those descenders are broken. So here is the letter Ain in its full form, and the 2 broken Ains next to it. During the printing process, the descender would sometimes break because the bottom part of the block was not supported. It was done to allow for easier and faster typesetting. But if the typesetter did not secure that bottom part of the letter, it would break under the pressure of the press. And we can see here also that sometimes those broken strokes would be filed after they were broken in the shape of the block, and that altered the original design of the letter. What is very unfortunate to see is that the altered form seems to infiltrate future designs, as we can see here in these typefaces that were probably cut in this shape to begin with. It's possible that this practice possibly made its way into design of later letters, even metal type versions of the Merubat typefaces. As we can see in this example of a typeface that was made in 1939. So you can see this Ain, and this is its original design. On the right, the letter Ain has the sequence and the direction of the strokes that are used in order to write it. And compared with the design that we just saw from that book on the left, you can see how the shape of the bottom end stroke might be mimicking the shape of the rectangular wood block. So when I look at this, I think this is another example of copying shapes from existing sources that mistreat the Hebrew letter. This can be seen since the 15th century, as we saw here, all the way to the 19th century. Type designers who had no knowledge or understanding of the anatomy of the Hebrew letter, and they reproduced letter shapes that were made, makes absolutely no sense to a native Hebrew reader. I have one more example that I'm particularly troubled by because this one shows a design solution and how this phenomena can be treated. So in the letter Lamed, we have a stroke that goes above the mem height, as we call it in Hebrew. We see a similar issue as we saw previously with the Ain. So the top part of the letters that were not secured will break when they were not printed with care. But for the lamed, we can find two alternative designs. So you can see here that instead of letting the block define the shape of the letter, this letter has the stroke going backwards to make it shorter and to fit better on the block. And here we can see the patterns that we use to create these wood typefaces with this alternative design, both for the top stroke and and also for an extended lamed. So now that we're almost done with the cataloging all the typefaces, we started a very, very long and slow process of letterpress printing using our collection. And as we go forward and use these old wood types, we find more challenges. For example, we need to make sure that all the letters have exactly the same height of precisely 0.918 inches. If this is not the case, some letters would print very dark and some would print very, very light, as you can see here in the initial proof that we made. And the solution for this involves a lot of measuring and calculating. So here you can see Kat measuring the height of each letter and then measuring the height of the paper that needs to be taped at the bottom of the letters in order to raise their height to be exactly 0.918 inch. And here are some of the calculations that goes into matching each piece of type to a mix of tape and copy paper. So what's next for this project? So I've kind of showed you a little bit of our fine art print that we're starting to work on now. We plan for future workshops, hopefully in the Carey Press Room or online. We plan for a publication, so publishing a monograph describing this project. We also started a process of what is called a type revival, so designing a digital typeface that is inspired from the typefaces that we have in our collection. And my favorite and most exciting that keeps happening when you're studying the collections in the Carey is making more discoveries and just being able to learn more about this collection, what it meant, how it was used, and how we can better our practices with the new things that we've learned from it. So with that, I want to hand things over to Amelia.
Thanks, everybody. So I'm going to spotlight, I have two cameras working for me. My name is Amelia Fontanelle. I'm Associate Curator here in the Carey Graphic Arts Collection. I am an alum of RIT. I have my graduate degree from the School of Printing Media. And I am here in the capacity of being your printer today, because it's wonderful to have these artifacts, but we truly believe that because they're industrial materials, used for commercial printing for so many years, it's wonderful to have them so that scholars can study them, but it's also really important to maintain them in working order. And so we firmly believe that we are preserving these objects through their careful use. So we are going to do some printing of some Hebrew type tonight. And I'd like to just thank everybody, especially Shani, for preparing this, because I'm a specialist in the history of printing from the Latin alphabet perspective. And when I acquired the Hebrew wood type collection, I knew I would have to learn so much in order to get them into working order. And that process has been just amazingly made smooth by Shani's presence here at RIT, and it really has diversified this collection in a great way. So I'm going to walk through the Carey Graphic Arts Collection's press room. Here we have 30 working printing presses, and we have thousands of type different kinds of typefaces, as Shani mentioned. We'll take a quick little peek at some of the Hebrew wood types as they're being processed by Shani and Kat Ward, our wonderful co-op student who is a graphic design major in College of Art and Design. And this is an example of some of the wood types that are being sorted and then placed into final boxes. And here's a great example of that kind of type that this is the carved instance of that diacritical mark, that dot in the center, and then there's a piece of nail that's sitting right there. So, you know, in the flesh, it is kind of fun to see why some have that and some don't. I am going to make my way back to one of our printing presses here in the Cary collection. And I like to say, once we get past this stand here, we enter the 20th century. Every other printing press that I showed you there was a 19th century printing press. But the one that we are going to work on today is a printing press that is very common in the 20th century, specifically for doing proofing. This is called the Vandercook Proof Press. All right, so what I have going on here is our wonderful, we're doing a little poster tonight. So our poster tonight is something that I know everybody can relate to. And the poster is saying something that has come into, I think, the English language too. Shani, I'm going to say it, but you have to correct me if I get the pronunciation. So okay. It is l'chaim, so to life. So it is the kind of toast word that you would use in Hebrew.
That was perfect, Amelia.
Oh, good, excellent. So that's what I have on the bed of the press here. But as Shani was saying, it takes a lot of work to get this beautiful print looking the way that it should. And so I'm very grateful to Kat Ward, who did the initial typesetting here. And so this is the early print that we had going on. You can see that it's not even, some characters are dropping out. So there, a lot of that process went on before we even joined tonight, where the characters were made to be the same height or level so that they would print evenly on the printing press. And then working towards that, even just a few hours before now, we were still trying to get it to work right. But you know, these things are living artifacts, and sometimes they take a little finesse before they get to be the way that we want them to be printed. So what I'm going to do here is turn on the press, and you might hear a whirring sound. This press dates from 1950s, and it has been continuously owned by RIT School of Printing since that time. So that's pretty rare to have a historic printing press that has had just one owner. There is a mechanic who works on these kinds of printing presses, these Vandercooks, and he was shocked, and he said it was in such great condition because of that single ownership, and it's always been used very carefully and maintained. So let's turn on the press. You might hear a whir. All right. So what's going to happen here, I'm going to come in a little closer so you can see the mechanics of the press, is that we have the type on the bed of the press right here. But what'll happen is I will activate some impression rollers, and this is what is putting ink on those. And we'll lower that so we can get that ink rolling out here. And when I actually put paper into the press, it will carry the paper and it will make the impression on the type through that. All right. This is the big reveal. So what I'm doing is I'm putting some pressure, and there's a little gripper, and that's what's going to hold the paper through the press as it runs through. So let us start the presses. All right, and I think we have a winner.
Oh, wow.
I think it's looking good.
Looking very good.
Excellent.
From here.
So I'm gonna good. And I think actually it needs to keep rolling a little bit. So I'm going to keep going. And you know, as somebody who is the manager for this technology collection, and we do lots and lots of printing demonstrations for various classes, and that could be for typography classes for students to understand the history of their craft, or for history of the book students, etc. I find that I get two kinds of students in here. Ones who are absolutely captivated by this technology, even with all of the extra work that goes into it because it's analog instead of digital. And then I get the other students who are could kind of take it or leave it because they feel like, oh my gosh, we have such better tools now. Why would we ever go backwards in time? And that's okay. I appreciate their perspective. But the one thing I'd like to say is that we at the Carry are absolutely blending both technologies, because this very piece here, the bottom part, which I'll read in a moment, was typeset on the computer using Adobe InDesign and printed on a laser. And then this piece here was printed analog through letterpress. And I'll read it. L'chaim, to life, is the Hebrew toast used in drinking to a person's health or well-being. It's typeset and printed in the Carey press room on April 21st, 2021. And we are preserving rare Hebrew wood types used in the Jewish American press at the turn of the 20th century. This collection is accessible to students, scholars, and printers who wish to engage with it and learn more about the history of American printing through physical artifacts. And so we'd like to send everybody who's on the call tonight a copy of this. So I'm sure you're in touch with Marty, and she can get we can send them through Marty. So we've printed a lot and we want to share them.